Welcome to Virtual Voices. I'm Elizabeth Peruch with the Leadership Foundation, and it is always my pleasure to welcome you to this new series that we created when the pandemic hit, as a way to ensure that our alumni and our networks are staying engaged and informed of opportunities and topics and conversations that you all want to have in this community. And we've hit conversations from education to redlining and now to technology. Technology has played such a big role in the workplace, in education, in places like mental health. And so today we're really going to dive deep and talk to two really wonderful women and professionals in this area that will give us a little bit more insight on how technology is adapting and how technology is helping us in these trying times, if you will. So I will introduce them in just a moment, but first I would like to just give a few Zoom reminders. We're all professionals at this point, I'm sure, at Zoom. But we want to ask that everybody stay on mute. I know I just said maybe we'll all come off mute. You never know. We'll see. I think the numbers are beautiful right now. If you have a question, we would love your questions. We'd love your reactions. We'd love any resources you might have. You can use the chat feature for that. I will call on you if you ask a question in that chat feature, and you can either ask that out loud or I'm happy to ask it on your behalf. We also got several questions from some folks during the registration process, and so we'll be sure to ask those questions as well. And if you'd like to ask those yourselves, I'll give you a moment to unmute and ask it yourself when we get to that point. If you need any help from Megan, she is hosting this call, Megan Vivier. Any technical help, then please feel free to reach out to her. And I must thank our sponsors. I know sometimes we thank sponsors and we don't really think about, when you're listening, really what an impact sponsors can make. We all have them probably in our own companies, but my gosh, the work that we do truly isn't possible without these three sponsors that dedicate support to our alumni engagement opportunities. Molson Coors Beverage Company, Southwest, and TIAA are not just sponsors, but they're thought partners with us, and they really help to develop these wonderful opportunities. They keep us hydrated, they keep us educated, and they keep us flying. And so we really appreciate our partners and our sponsors here. So thank you so much to our three sponsors. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce Franny Matthews and Cassie Roach. I'm going to read a quick bio on each of them, and then we're going to jump right into kind of a Q&A. As I'm reading their bios, what I would love for the audience to do is just in that chat feature, give us a word or two or a sentence about why you're here today. Why did you care to come to learn more about technology? Just give us some of your thoughts on why you chose to be here today, and then we'll jump right in. So first, I would like to introduce Franny. Franny Matthews is the CEO of the Colorado Technology Association, CTA for short. And before joining CTA, Franny spent 18 years with IBM and served as the IBM Senior Location Executive for Denver. She has a passion for helping the next generation and has a particular interest in STEM education, which has been proven by her ongoing mentorship of students in various capacities. Franny lives here in Denver with her husband, Bill, and they have two grown daughters, Christine and Gracie. The photo behind her is her daughter just a few years ago only. Thank you, Franny, for being here. We're so glad to have you. And Cassie Roach. Cassie is Cisco's Vice President of Global Public Sector, currently the largest market segment spanning government, education, and healthcare. Her organization is responsible for the development and execution of Cisco's global go-to-market strategy, serving more than 40,000 customers worldwide. She's very passionate about diversity and inclusion as the executive sponsor for Cisco's Women of Cisco, as well as a Multiplier Effect sponsor. If you're not familiar with Multiplier Effect, I absolutely encourage you to Google the Multiplier Effect. I love that you're a part of that, Cassie. Congratulations. She also serves as the board chair of the Colorado Literacy and Learning Center. So as you can see, we're very lucky to have these two with us today. Thrilled to hear more about technology and what you have to offer. And so again, love to hear from the audience. Keep the resources and conversation going in the chat feature. And Franny, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a little bit more about your focus at CTA and advancing the state's ecosystem through talent, advocacy, economic development, and community. Oh, and you're on mute. Look, Zoom bingo. We're started already.
Okay, I'm gonna have to put $1 in the pot for that one.
I like it.
Hi, I'm Franny Matthews, and I do lead the Colorado Technology Association. And we have been around for 26 years under some different names and have kind of morphed in what our focus has been. But in general, our mission is to ensure that Colorado has a tech-centric, thriving, and inclusive economy. And I am very passionate about this because a couple reasons. One is that tech is going to be with us for a long time. It's ubiquitous across industries, and as such, it really equalizes a lot of the ups and downs that we've seen in the economy in Colorado, and which is kind of bizarre because it's also the great disruptor. The other reason that I think it's important is this is where the next middle class is coming from. The importance of digital literacy is I can't stress it enough. And if you are in a job that you don't have capabilities of transitioning into utilizing technology for that job, it's going to make it really, really difficult. And that is probably the number one thing that keeps me awake at night. So when I look at what we do, we work at keeping the community together from a business perspective and also from an idea perspective. We work on the talent issue, both long-term and short-term. Longer term, we have a foundation for bringing more underserved and underrepresented groups into tech. And then from a shorter term, we're trying to connect the dots a little bit better than would normally happen on getting talent, sources of education to talent and talent to employers. We also work in economic development and work a lot with, the EDC, with the state EDC or economic development offices, as well as the city economic development offices and around the state in general. What did I miss? I missed policy. We are not a lobbyist. We don't have a lobbyist on staff. We try to speak for the tech community in general to our legislators at the state level and at the federal level. It is so important that we have responsible legislation that doesn't thwart innovation and also is evergreen as things change. And it's a very difficult balancing act. So that's what we do. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited about what is happening in Colorado and specifically in Denver with kind of this tremendous growth that we're seeing in tech companies coming to Colorado.
Thank you, Franny. I love that you brought up kind of the talent side of this. I know there was a lot of interest from the audience, so we'll get more into that because I think that's a really important piece of this. Cassie, I'd love to turn to you and just ask, how are you and how is Cisco really helping customers to better understand and use technology, data, innovation to address these rapidly changing circumstances that we're facing?
Sure, and thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you all. Great to see everyone today. At Cisco, we've always believed that universal broadband internet access is one of the things, and it's a human right. When we think about inclusive futures and inclusive futures for all and the access to some of those things, interestingly, from our lens, we look at it as just as important as food or shelter or water, and no more importantly now than when in this pandemic. Think about the criticality of the internet services and some of the things that brings. And this access has been vital to our health and our safety and our welfare, the economic and social components of it. I know Franny mentioned some of those same things. I have a slide to share that some may have seen some of these stats before. Let me just pull them up and we will get right to that. Let's see if we can. Should be showing. Doesn't look like it is. Oh, here we go.
There.
See that. So one of the things that we talk about, and you'll note that this is from one of our analyst conferences, but the stats are really interesting and no more so than now during the pandemic. The 3.7 billion people that don't have access or remain unconnected. It's critical that we think about that. And it is in many of the things that we think about. It is in undeveloped areas. It is also in developed areas. And Franny, you mentioned some of the things about Colorado and what we're looking at and how do we want to make sure people have access to that. It's critical. That's sort of the baseline is the connectivity. And then what can we do on top of it from a technology perspective? So whether it's lack of access or something else, I think then to take a look at the 35% of the population from a digital divide standpoint and what that means across our student population or ability to have skills and skill sets in our workforce. The data is staggering in the context of where we have or have not connectivity on a global basis. And what we don't have today is the stats for Colorado, but I think it is, we see some of the same. And I will just tell you, in our local experience, it is the same type of thing that we look at, from getting to the frontline workers and making sure that they have access to their applications and making sure that they can respond appropriately, and for teachers and learners and some of those same things. I think we will talk about many of these same circumstances. And as you know, initially with the school closures, just thinking about what we're doing to create and maintain access across the board and secure that access. With COVID, for millions of the students, looking at the right-hand side of the slide, millions and millions, literally their education has paused in the context of their capacity to continue because of the virtual environments. So it's a really tough circumstance. We're doing a number of things across I can stop the sharing, but we're doing a number of things across the internet platforms to make sure that people have better access, can maintain the security, that we can get things out to our rural communities, both in Colorado and other places across the US. Whether it's making sure that a school bus that takes our students and typically would have that capacity to move students around, potentially that's a wireless access point in a rural community. A library might be an access point in a rural community where more and more people, not only students, but more and more people have access to be able to continue with the things that they need to do on a daily basis. I think the other thing is that from a Cisco standpoint, we consider that we have a moral obligation and an economic obligation to make sure that we help close that digital divide and that no one is left behind. From our standpoint, our Inclusive Future report from 2020, which we're happy to share with folks, we estimate that bridging the digital divide would improve the world's economy by about $7 trillion and lift 500 million people out of poverty. So when we look at what technology can do for all of us at varying degrees, it is really significant. Another component of this is an analysis that the United Nations did and their conference on trade and development, and they sum it up around the coronavirus and the ability to move faster and make these changes on a more appropriate level to really step forward in a meaningful way from a modernization standpoint, and make sure that we don't leave people behind and think about what we're doing to create that inclusive future. I think then lastly, I would just say, the things that we are focused on from a Cisco standpoint really span all of the components of this. In your introduction, Elizabeth, you mentioned that I really focus on the public sector from my standpoint at Cisco, but we do many different things, whether it's in the private sector across financial markets or manufacturing, or what we're looking at from a transportation standpoint. Water is certainly critical to us here in Colorado. Many of these things, how we respond in disasters, it all coincides and it all comes together from an ability to use technology effectively and to do it in a way that drives the inclusivity and the access for everyone. So I will go ahead and turn it back to you, and thank you again.
Well, thank you so much. And you hit on something that really is so important to this conversation, and that's the access of technology. We all have the comfort right now of being able to benefit from that, but that number is staggering, 3.7 billion who don't have that same kind of access. I think that's important. I want to start with a question from the audience. We got some really great ones that came out of that. And this kind of goes back to the talent side of it. But Richard Nyman, I think you're on here. Would you like to unmute and ask your question if you remember it? You submitted it with registration. I'm seeing movement. Is he? There he is.
I'm sorry, I don't remember it. It was about 10 days.
I can ask it. That's
Go ahead.
good. I just wanted to hear your voice. So what Richard wants to know is, what training should high school students receive to be valuable employers after they graduated from college? And I think this really goes in connection to, Daniela, you had the question also of, how can we help our disconnected youth better access to tech careers? So if we can kind of dive into the education side of technology and really look at, you know, how technology is working, how should we be helping the workforce get ready for that? So let's start with the workforce side and how we can better get people connected to these kind of careers. Franny, you're unmuted. I'll let you take it away first.
Well, Richard, thank you and it's nice to see you. You're doing some great work. You know, it is interesting and it's consistent when we talk to employers. Employers are certainly looking for particular technical skills, or at least aptitude in the areas that, whatever the job description is. But the fundamental things that they're looking for are the fundamentals. They're looking for somebody that have, you know, people that have the understanding that they show up for work and they show up for work on time, and they're critical thinkers. And if they don't understand the goal or what the job is, that they ask clarifying questions, they're curious. It's all those things that make, you know, an older worker, you know, an important part of the team. But, you know, I also look at, how do you prepare? So you're in high school, you know, what's the way to gain your expertise? I love apprenticeship programs and internships, because that is the greatest way to get an on-ramp into what businesses are doing and seeing what the possibilities are. The other thing is that we've really, and we'll, I'm sure, talk a lot more about education in general, but we've kind of had in the United States a really firm, here's the path to success. You go K through 12, you go to college, you get a job. That's blown up. That is certainly a path, but there's lots of paths. And so if I were to do it again with my kids, I would have said, take a gap year. I want you to get technical education in a deep area that you're interested in. And then if you want to go to college. But instead of making, you know, $10 an hour or $12 an hour, you can make, you know, $25 an hour and gain additional skills while you're in college. So that was kind of my long-winded answer to that.
No, I like that. And Cassie, do you want to add anything to just kind of how we better prepare our youth to be a part of this career path?
It is a great question. And being the parent of 4 girls,
oh, wow,
3 of whom are science-y kids, absolutely. And I would just say, you know, career paths take many different forms, as Franny was noting. And even from a technology company standpoint, we look at lots of different components for the career path. There is certainly the classic, as you would expect from a company like Cisco. There's the classic, how do we get into a technology career? So some of those things, and Richard, to your question about what should we do in K-12, you know, a bit of an obvious answer, but the math and the sciences, the hard sciences, some of those things. As Franny was mentioning, some of the soft skills that we look for from that standpoint, the ability to team, the ability to ask questions, the curiosity, the ability to work with others and demonstrate that in a meaningful way. Internships. Have you done some things? You know, so many of our high schools have the science Olympiads or the math Olympiads, some of those things as well. There's another component to this that I would just mention, is that part of our Cisco's social responsibility program, we have something called Networking Academies, and that's been in place for 25 years. And we do it through K-12, and we do it through community colleges and some in higher eds. And that's a great opportunity for kids and for the schools themselves to get their hands on technology. We extend the curriculum in a gratis circumstance. We update it all the time, and they get to go to national championships, and the winners of some of those get to go in front of other leaders of the country. And so it's a really unique opportunity that some of it is just getting the word out, frankly, on that. But from the student's standpoint, you know, the answer is really just participate. And I think, you know, it takes all of us to make sure that our students want to do that or are encouraged to do it, or certainly for any of the women who are here with us today, and for our daughters, you know, many times we've had the conversations about, you're right, you might be the only woman in the room, just go be there anyway. Just keep moving, keep doing it. And you know, from a diverse standpoint, of course, across all of those things, technology is always sort of the master equalizer. And it's something that we look at, and it's a great way to look at that. I think the rest of the skill set that we would consider, you know, think about any of the technology companies, Cisco notwithstanding, we're looking for folks who want to lead people and might enjoy something in HR or a people and communities standpoint. We look for folks who really appreciate finance type of career, or supply chain, or manufacturing, or design. There are many, many things and many entree points. And I think that's the second piece I would just leave us with from a work set or a skill set standpoint, is that there isn't one entree point, that it's okay to come in to a technology career or to any type of career from something else and move over. So. Thank you.
That's such a great point. That is such a great point. There's so many ways to enter. I often think with my 3-year-old and how often she wants to watch videos on my phone that I need to download some of those coding. There's like, aren't there some coding apps that you can give your kids so they start learning also while they're doing it? So I'm excited for that. Start them young, right?
Start them young.
That's right.
Abacus is great still. It's not digital.
Okay. But noted, that's okay.
Also teaches strategy, you know, so some of the things, right? Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I want to stay on education just for a second, and love to hear from both of you on how, I mean, we've seen technology play a huge role in education. We've seen the disparities there and how many youth are left out because they don't have access. But we also see how it's really helped our students stay connected during such an important time. So if you guys could talk a little bit about kind of how technology has adapted to the education world, and maybe look at some of the pros and cons of what it's done and what we've seen, and some trends locally and globally since we have that access here. Whoever unmutes first, that's what I watch for. Okay. Oh, Franny.
I hit the button. It's like here. Okay. You know, it's kind of amazing. I mean, we really, everyone, you know, technology is a great disruptor. It's an accelerator. It's a petri dish for innovation. And in that, you've got pros and cons on everything it does, right? One of the things that I'm really excited about is that it's going to break up some of the standardization that we've had on how we teach people. The other thing is that the world's gotten complicated because of, you know, quite frankly, technology has been a kind of a precursor to complexity. And it's really not, you know, having the credential without the expertise doesn't mean anything. So you've got to, you know, if you're going to, I think everybody should be thinking, how am I spending my time to increase my expertise? And then the credentialing should be just the proof of that, as opposed to, if I have a bachelor's of science and blah, 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 then I'm going to get a job because I have that bachelor's of science. That's not how it's going to work. The other thing is that because the world is moving so quickly as a result of technology, that you have to have a mindset just as you would for your own physical health, that you don't, you know, exercise until you're 21 and then stop, right? So I spend probably an hour to an hour and a half a day really reading, you know, doing, you know, short sprints on improving my expertise in particular areas that I'm interested in. And so that's really important. One of the things I love about technology is it has improved the access. I would love to see how many people have taken massively open online courses. If you want to, like, shoot a thumbs up, it'd be interesting to see. It is extraordinary what is available free. So I do a lot of Coursera, but that is, I'm really excited because it is an access point for people that would otherwise not have it. But to Cassie's point, and I know Cindy Parsons would agree with this, if you don't have the pipe going, so you can access it, it's really difficult to do.
Mhm.
The positive is that this is pretty ubiquitous, not completely, but you can get it off a cellular network. So anyway, the other, just in general, is the mobility, that there is an opportunity not only geographically to be anywhere you want to be and have a learning resource, but it's a lattice. And Cassie, you said it beautifully. You've got all these choices. You may wind up going this direction. It's like, wow, that's of interest, but this is of more interest, and you can go over this way. So your entry points are, I don't know if it's infinite, but it's pretty diverse.
Yeah, no, I love that. So Cassie, to you again on this education side of it, really our students and what changes they've seen and how they've been able to learn. If you have any input on kind of what technology has done for our youth and for education, and not just the young students, right? Even our college students, and kind of how this has played out in the technology world.
Sure. Well, and I think there are some of the comments that are ubiquitous across, whether they're K-12 or younger students, higher ed students, adult learners, all of those different things. Certainly technology can play lots of different roles. Whether it is actually fundamental to how the class is delivered, whether it's Zoom or any of the other platforms. Cisco's platform is WebEx. I'm sure some of you have heard of it, but lots of different collaboration capacity to be able to take what is being taught or the instruction and get it out into more hands. And so I think it's really, between some of the things that we've seen, certainly through the pandemic, where we've got our younger students, and it's a bit more difficult because you can't control the surroundings. And what we've seen then in that K-12 environment is it's quite a bit more of a controlled environment when we're in that teaching and learning setting. And so you lose some of that. And so it's not, is it technology or not technology, but how can you use the fact that you are actually in a virtual setting to do some different things that you might not be able to do in a setting that's in person. And so technology can play a role in that. Certainly you can do some breakout sessions, you can do some other things where you can really help the students manage their learning. And as we transition then into a higher ed learning circumstance, you can really create some teaming environments that you may or may not have had in the in-person. The idea behind technology is how do we take the experience and make it better than something we would have had in person, create more access or more inclusion or an ability to compare more ideas and have the time to do that and create the thinking and the capacity for the critical components of that, and do it in a way that we might not be able to do because you have a very set time period in a lecture or in a class. And then certainly as we transition to adult learning, much of that, as we all know, has been online for some time, and that is the manner in which the business schools or the extended programs are getting into other people's hands. And what is interesting economically is that anytime we see a downturn in the economy, we see more adult learners in participating, whether it's through community colleges, which is great, by the way, a great way to do it, or through other outreach programs at from a higher ed standpoint. So part of that is participatory. Part of it is being able to log in, use applications to see what people are doing and how they are participating. And we can actually gauge a learner's aptitude with the technology in a much more differentiated way when we're doing something and it's got a technology attached to it. So I would just pause there. And, and let me just add it, there are certainly challenges, of course. And the first thing we discussed was the ability to be connected. So I think, in the context of the pandemic, that is one piece. But coming out of the pandemic, taking some of the learnings, and Franny was so great to mention how it can be disrupting. We have some people who would prefer to learn at home. We have some folks, even in a K-12 environment, who might step back and say, I'm getting less bullying than I might if I were in person in a classroom. So our education systems have the capacity to really look across some of the things that they're trying to manage as their challenges and really address them in a meaningful way, because we can do some things differently.
I'm glad you brought that last point up. And I think it goes right in line, Cindy, with your comment in there, is really adopting, right? I mean, access is one thing, but how do we use it to our benefit? How do we help people that may or may not like to learn solo or like siloed or not? And there's a lot of ways that we should be able to adopt it. I don't know, Cindy, if you wanted to follow with any addition to that comment, because I think it fits in beautifully.
Sure. I wasn't really thinking of it necessarily in the context of education per se, but that definitely is part of it. I was thinking of it more, and I really appreciated what Cassie shared earlier in terms of the 3.7 billion that remain unconnected today. And part of that challenge, I think, just based on my background and experience, is creating that trust for the providers that are delivering the services. How do we get these populations that maybe don't trust the internet provider or don't trust the connection to really feel like they can? And I would just be curious if Cassie or Franny had thoughts on that. I mean, I know that that's a big struggle. You can do it through community centers, you can do it through nonprofits and schools to create that trust with those groups of people. But where's our big, aha on that? How do we really, have these people adopt the connection so that they can learn?
Great question.
That's a big fat question.
A big hairy
Well, it is. I mean, wait a minute, private sector is a for-profit, therefore, yeah. And the reality is, and in fact, Comcast has a great program for low-cost internet access on a needs base that is really quite efficient relative to doing something else that is not private sector, So I think that we could deep dive really very far on the, corporate social responsibility and capitalism on this one. So
I didn't mean to take us back. I just know that it continues to be a struggle. So I think when we're talking about access and online learning, K through 12 through adult learners, we do need to still remember there are people that just don't trust to adopt the technology.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is not something I had even considered, but it's real, and it's real with my 75-year-old father, who is a forever learner, but I don't know if it's not a comfort level to adopt it, but it is certainly something there. Cassie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. You certainly don't have to, but to the trust component.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think everything that, at least the lens that we look through from a Cisco standpoint, is done with trust first. And so from that standpoint, we know that not everything is trustworthy. We understand that there are more bad actors today than ever before. And at the same time, Cindy, to your point or your question, really want to help people feel confident that as they step in and begin using technology, whether it's our parents, whether it's young children, it doesn't matter the circumstance, but as they step in and begin, that those security aspects or the cyber aspects, the trust component is built into what they are using. So I think you're going to see more and more of that as the world's #1 provider of cybersecurity and trust aspect. We certainly understand what that looks like on a global basis. And we are working to make it seamless every day because of exactly the adoption challenges that you're raising. it's clear across the board, even when we have children, and particularly in the K-12 environment, who have to log on for their classes, or they're trying to do something, or it's an application. You know, Elizabeth, you mentioned something in the context of doing some of the gaming things earlier. It could be anything, but if that's attached to the internet, right, if there is connectivity, then there is an opportunity for something to happen that nobody wants to happen. And I just think in that, from that lens, it is our absolute responsibility when we're in a technology environment, as we are at Cisco, to make sure that that is less of the individual or end user's worry, and it's handled systemically, and it's handled as a baseline and a part of what is inherent in the technology itself. Other things that people can do are certainly to be careful. You know, we can talk about cybersecurity an awful lot. Maybe that's another type of topic. But Cindy, you know, just to finish up with an observation there, you know, part of it is we go back to basics. We say to people, well, are you locking your car when you get out of it? Are you locking your house when you get out, when you leave your home? You know, some of the basics that we always encourage people to pay attention to. It's also important to do those same things when we're in a connected or in an online environment. So yes, it's very important, and we are all paying immense attention to it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We've got a question that came up in the chat feature. Nikki, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. I'm just curious to hear your opinions on what the recent passage of 2H means for you. Okay. Excuse me. Sorry, that's my kids are home today.
I love it. Franny, you're unmuted. Do you have thoughts on that? This is also a question from Michael.
You're talking about 2H, and maybe it's just that I had too long a ballot, or
Sorry, it was the city of Denver. I think it was on their ballot to provide internet, telephone, and television services.
Mom. So
I can. Oh.
Well, I'm going to take a shot at this in that I think on all of this, I think a lot of us need to step back and look at things in totality. And it goes back to Cindy's question on trust. You know, is there infrastructure that can already do what we need to do? I mean, I kind of look at it and say, what solution are we trying to solve? Are we trying to solve for access? Well, then let's look at all the possibilities for how we could get better access. And I think that you know, I'm not sure that, you know, we need to, and I in no way do I want to have this turn into a political discussion. And it's kind of difficult because it's all intertwined, right? Policy, technology, business, but I really go back to root cause and then really building up how are we going to solve the problem, and I don't know that that's the answer.
So Cassie, before I ask your input on that, Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts because you had the same question when you registered.
Yeah, so 2H doesn't put in any kind of infrastructure. All it did was exempt Denver from the statewide ban on broadband access being a public utility. The presentation that I went to, I don't believe we did it in our redlining presentation, but it was after that with somebody who had done a bunch of maps on youth violence prevention.
Jonathan, yeah.
See clearly along the redlined neighborhoods that there are huge gaps in computer and internet access. And what she said was she had a meeting like 3 or 4 years ago with people from CenturyLink and Xfinity, and I don't know who all was in the room. But she talked about how they were very frank and just said, look, it costs us too much money to put the infrastructure in those neighborhoods, and we don't feel like we're going to get a return on our investment in doing it. So as long as the private sector doesn't have a financial incentive into building up that infrastructure, where is it government's role to kind of pick up the slack?
Cassie or Franny, any additional input on that one? I know it is political, but it's an interesting topic and very relevant.
Well, and I also look back on history, right? So how did we all get telephones? It was a different, there's always been a solution on how we've done things in the past. Just looking at that and the idea of universal service, right? We had universal service. And so people that were in urban areas paid more for their telephone from AT&T than they did in rural AT&T in the Bell system than they did in rural. But the rural got built out because there was money to pay for rural telephones to get built out. And in return, the AT&T had a monopolistic, kind of environment. So that got broken up, right? The modified final judgment broke that up. And then we had a big change in 96, which, not to give a history lesson, but this was a really big deal on why we've had such an explosion of innovation. It was a big component of it. And so I think that what you just described, Michael, is exactly right. If you can't justify putting the infrastructure into a particular area, we've got to get creative on how to get the connectivity in there, just as we did with universal service a bazillion years ago. Cindy, you've got to have some.
She unmuted.
I will go back to what Cassie said too, though. I do think that as you look at rural communities, it's a densification issue, as Franny just outlined. And I think we'll have to look at new innovative technologies to deliver in rural America. Some of the wireless access points is a starting point. I just think there's going to have to be different technology solutions, because it's not feasible to build out a hardwired infrastructure to some of these, rural communities, as everyone would like. And I see a comment in the chat about a condo that's not being serviced by Comcast, and I'll be happy to reach out to my friends and see if we can get that fixed, because certainly in densely populated areas, there shouldn't be an issue of delivering service, at least from a Comcast perspective. So, yeah, I think it's tough. It's a tough question. I think with the new administration coming in, you'll see even greater focus on this. And I think I have great confidence, having been 30 years in the media and technology industry, that the companies are going to continue to innovate and figure out how to get broadband connectivity ubiquitously across the country. So should it be moving faster? Sure. But I think there are some smart people at many companies working on that today.
Okay, well, Cindy and Richard, if you guys end up working together and getting internet to your condo, Richard, then we want to know about it, because that happened here. I love it. I want to ask quickly, kind of shifting gears, all of us through this pandemic have had to, the word of 2020, pivot. We've had to adjust and really conform and find ways to use technology to create opportunities like this, virtual voices. On the back end, how is the tech world keeping up with the changes? We're having to change quickly on this side, but how is the tech world keeping up with this incredibly rapid growth? I've read some things that say the tech world has, grown by 7 years in the last 9 months because they've had to. So how's the tech world keeping up? Cassie, you win.
We are doing many, many things so just in terms of our own personal experience from a Cisco standpoint, and the ability to maintain the workflow. As you can imagine, when the pandemic started, there was just an inordinate amount and pressure on an ability to make sure everyone could work from home or have school from home or do whatever. And what that means is, from a private sector standpoint, you've got folks like the financial services industry or manufacturing, as we mentioned before, retail. Think about all of the things that many of us interface with every day. And so much of that had been online to serve citizens, right? It's a very consumer-driven type of environment. And as we moved to those employees having to go and work from home, some of the jobs couldn't still be done, as you well know. And so some of the demand on technology companies was simply to allow those other companies to continue their day-to-day jobs and their day-to-day livelihoods. When we move over also then into a government standpoint or an education standpoint, we've been talking a lot about education or healthcare. Some of that, and think about healthcare, think about telehealth, think about being able to still, service patients in their needs, whether it's mental health or other health issues, to be able to do what we can in a telehealth environment. Many of the laws, much of the legislation had to be amended very, very quickly. So you have this idea of how does a technology company respond? What do we do? Whether it's companies like Cisco, which is an internet-based, we have 80% or more of the backbone of the internet globally. So it's really this idea of what are we doing from a connectivity standpoint with all of the service providers and everything that they do to make sure that the hardwired connectivity is there to take advantage of. It's then how do you get to the access and what are some of those things? So it took all of us working together in a very, very urgent manner to make sure that people had the communication tools that they needed, because at the end of the day, that's what it was. Then we had to figure out, could we make sure that applications were secure so you could still do your job from home? And what does that mean? And then if you're a government and you might have been, think about our court systems. Many of those are 100 years old. The laws, the traditions, the things that we do, and to keep the wheels of justice moving or to keep the wheels of government moving in any set of circumstances, it took all of us across the technology spectrum really working together to be able to continue to deliver that and create that level of connectivity. And to do some things to really up-level the technology in a hurry so that, let's say, you want to go to traffic court and you want to continue that and something has to be done there. How is that docket managed? How do we get people into a virtual setting? If you're working from home now and your children are home, you can't leave the house to go to court. And by the way, court isn't in session in person, right? So yeah, I'm just sort of pointing to some specific things where when we think across the continuum of everything that happens, whether it's governmental or private sector or anything else, it took a massive effort across the board to do some things to enable the connectivity with the service providers and all the connectivity providers, to enable that connectivity, to enable the security that went along with it. Cindy can attest to the level of security and some of the things that they needed to do right away for all the people working from home, and to be able to come back and say, all right, now I can do that job from home, where many of these roles had never been done outside of an office setting before. So it's quite unique. And it was I know I used the word massive before. It was very urgent. We had people around the world working 24/7 and still are, to make sure that we have the capacity to ensure that people can do their work from wherever they need to and have access to skills in case they need some learning to be able to do it in a differentiated way. So it's this idea of the workplace and the work that you're doing, and how do we continue to enable that?
I mean, you paint such a, well, I'll make a comment after you, Franny. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's been kind of interesting because I have more like on the ground anecdotal information because we've got so many CIOs that are, heavily participating in CTA. And so through roundtables, and we did a couple surveys. In essence, the IT professionals already were ahead of the game. Most of the actual IT, they already had a work from home, a partial work from home. So it wasn't like a big deal for their own organization. It was the business units, Cassie pointed out, that there's a lot of issues. I mean, and it's like silly issues, like in healthcare, if you've got somebody that's got a printer that's printing out health records in a home that's not secure. I mean, it's not silly, but it's like, oh yeah, that is a problem. And so the pandemic has, it's the mother, the pandemic is the mother of invention. And we have seen that would be a silver lining. We just saw heroics in technology professionals figuring out how to get us functional at some level in this digital delivery. And to call them heroes is kind of odd, but the reality is that our ability to do what we're doing right now has been incredibly important for our economy to keep going. And they are heroes.
Well, then I will just add to that just briefly, Franny, your point there, on a global basis, think about how COVID began and sort of the role that it took across the global, the move that it took across the world. A great example is, to your point, from a technology lens, we've had the ability to work from home for years. We can work from a Cisco standpoint, our employees can work anywhere they have an internet connection with any type of internet connection, right? It can be mobile, it can be driven lots of different ways. Yet that isn't everyone's experience. We've also been doing video for a long, long time in corporate settings, across enterprise settings. And so what we saw, to your point about some of the heroics, were, go back to Italy and what they were facing right at the beginning. And we had all of our employees go to all of our offices, take all of our capacity for video out, deliver it to those local healthcare professionals, deliver it to the government professionals. So in a situation where they may not have been able to order something because those supply chains may not have been set up yet, we simply took it to their homes and set it up for them and made sure it worked. And we did that across the US, and we did that across Brazil, and we did that across Canada. And I can just say, from that sort of on the ground level of response, it hit everything and everyone. And your point about, the personal information and some of those things that need to be protected, and people aren't thinking about it because in the context of process, healthcare is a really great example of where so many things weren't set up to be done virtually. And people really just figured it out as it went. Oh, this isn't working. This doesn't work. What are we going to do instead? And I know we've all had that same experience, no matter what we've been doing in the past 9 months. So.
And I think that's exactly why I asked that question, because I think you guys and anybody in this tech world deserves a huge round of applause. You guys are heroes because you're keeping this all going. So a huge debt of gratitude goes to everybody working on this type of work. I want to finish with kind of our standard last question, and it's kind of a different one for this topic. But I want to just ask the two of you, what can we do, or what advice can you give us as a leadership network in connection to this technology world? Is there advice you can give us on how to better use it? Is there tips, tricks, anything, any parting knowledge and wisdom that you would like to leave us with, so that as leaders, we are well equipped and well educated? It's kind of a tough one. When it's other topics, there's like, go donate here or learn here. This is kind of a fun one. So I can't wait to see what you come up with. Cassie, you unmuted.
Sure. So let's start with the how to better use it. I would just say use it as often as you can. It particularly in this time where we're not together with families, and we're not together with coworkers, and we're not together with our community in this exact circumstance. A quick check-in, an ability to use video to do it so we can see one another's eyes. The day comes, as we've all expressed, when we're not in this frame anymore, and we get to see someone in their full body, and that will be great, and everyone looks forward to that. And even though we can do it in some of our local settings, we certainly can't do it across state boundaries or across the country or in a global setting yet. And I think just to continue to use it to your advantage is the absolute best thing to do. Have some fun with it. ask people provocative questions, and I don't mean in a strange way or a challenging way, but let's have the conversations and let's make sure we're doing the things that we would do together if we were in person. Very important to do that. Some of the tips and tricks, think about your surroundings, think about the lighting. If we're always working with one another over video, let's make sure we can see each other in that circumstance. Let's make sure, because if we were in a room together, we'd be able to do that. So easy tips and tricks there. Lots are available. You can Google them. You've got folks who will tell you in your own circumstances or your own environments. And the ability, this is probably the most important part, the ability to be inclusive is really unique. You can take a guide from what the Supreme Court does, which is they are not done with session until everyone on the bench has spoken. And so it's easy to do that in a setting like this, where we can look around the room, we can have a bit of a more ubiquitous approach with each other, and we can engage just as you've been doing here and just as we try to do across the board. But what it does is it starts to equalize voices in a much more meaningful way. And so I would say that. Thank you.
Wow. Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. Franny, parting tip in the last moments we have.
Well, first of all, Cassie just put a lump in my throat. That was beautifully said. I think that one thing that we didn't talk about is what technology has done as far as the ubiquity of messages and the polarization. That's a whole different kettle of fish that we could talk about with AI, ethical AI, all of that. I think it's really important to get out of our comfort zones. And so I am very, I try really hard to listen to people that I might just not agree with at all, right? But I want to understand what they're trying to say. I have a friend that I worked with for a number of years, and he's got a lot of different opinions than I do. But what I do know is that he loves his family. He wants peace. I mean, all the fundamental things that bring us together as human beings, we're the same. And so we try to dialogue. We try to hear each other's voices. And I think that is critically important right now. When we see this big polarization, one of the reasons that happens is because we are creatures that need patterns, and we are always looking for some level of certainty. And if we can, simplify it and dice it up and it's over here or it's over here, we'll hold on to it because it's a security blanket. And what we need to do is listen to things that make us uncomfortable. So, I mean, I've got a bunch of books to read. You can read Synchronicity. You can read 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. You can read Weapons of Math Destruction. I mean, there's a ton of stuff out there. You could read Madeleine Albright's Fascism. These are all things that should stimulate thoughts.
Well, good, Franny. Maybe we'll get you to email me the list of books and we'll add it in the recap email. That'd be great. Well, I know we're over a minute. I want to just close out and take a few minutes. First to say a big thank you to Cassie and Franny. This was really insightful and beautiful. I didn't think I'd have that word for this conversation, but really useful information. So a huge debt of gratitude. Thank you for spending time with us. As we close out, I also want to just remind the group of the Leadership Foundation programs that we have. It is recruitment season for us. Impact Denver, our 6-month program that dives deep into issues. We have applications open until December 4th. If you or somebody you know would be a great fit for one of our programs, we hope that you as our best recruiters will spread the word. We also have nonprofit or Impact Denver nonprofit project proposals. If your nonprofit organization, one you're on the board of, somebody you know, needs help with a specific project, then we have the leaders to give you. You can submit for a proposal, and Impact Denver participants and leaders may choose that proposal and help work with you to give some free assistance with whatever project that might be. We'd love to see your nonprofit submit for that. Alumni Giving Day, I'm very excited to announce this is for everybody, but we're pushing it to our alumni. Next week, November 18th, will be our first ever Alumni Giving Day, and this is a way for our classes and our alumni to rally together to support the Leading Colorado Scholarship Fund, which ensures that finances are not a barrier, that leaders from all industries, all sectors, all backgrounds have access to be a part of our program. So we hope that you guys will take it a part in this. We are going to launch more of this today, so be on the lookout, and we hope you will attend. Do we have another about snowflakes? Nope. Okay. Then thank you all so very much. Thank you for giving us 3 extra minutes. And again, thank you, Franny and Cassie. We really appreciate you. We'll see you guys soon.